let's wrap this one up. Back to the Future Part 3, the epic conclusion to one of the coolest science fiction trilogies that ever existed in cinema. Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, once again returning as Marty McFly and Doc Brown, once again directed by Robert Zemeckis. And this one just feels special. It's a final chapter. Marty McFly obtains a 70-year-old message from the time-traveling Doc in which he informs Marty that he's retired to a small town in the Old West, otherwise known as Hill Valley, in the year 1885. Marty then finds out that the Doc was murdered shortly after sending the letter. So Marty has to save his friend, and he'll have to travel back in time, disentangle a love-struck Doc from a local school teacher played by Mary Steenburgen, and of course repair the DeLorean, all while avoiding a posse of gunslingers because it's a Western. Now, I'm going to make a bold claim here. And I don't know if this is a bold claim to a lot of you guys. I don't know what your feelings about this are. But I'm going to sit here and say it, and I'm going to make an argument for it throughout this video. I'm a big believer in this now. I think Back to the Future Part 3 is considerably better than Part 2. Now, I know. I respect that there are big, avid fans of Part 2 that are out there. But I just think that across the board, Part 3 is such a superior film. And I'm not just saying this as an objective bias, because coming from me, I love a good Western. So the production design team really got to have fun with this one. The costumes in this movie are impeccable. The sets are just fantastic. And I also think a big advantage that this movie has over Part 2 is that it doesn't have to overly rely on CGI like its predecessor did. Because as I mentioned in my review of Part 2, the CG in that movie was incredibly fake. It looked fake. It probably looks cool for the time in 1989, but come on. You're looking at it through a 2025 lens, and you can tell that a lot of that stuff wasn't there. Now, there is one CGI image that appears at the very end of Part 3, but even then, I think it still looks pretty darn good. But that's because this movie is set 100 years before 1985. So you don't have to overly rely on CGI to make things look convincing. And I think the performances are much better in this movie too as compared to Part 2. I think Michael J. Fox in particular is hilarious in this movie. And that's unlike the previous two, because Doc Brown was relied upon to be the comic's zany relief. But Michael J. Fox really got to let his freak flag fly here. He was so much fun to watch, especially on this most recent rewatch I did. Because it's really funny how he comes up with a fake name. Every single time he goes to a different time period, he basically has to come up with a fake persona. And because it's 100 years beforehand, it's a Western, he wants to feel cool, so he chooses the name Clint Eastwood. Because nobody has heard of Clint Eastwood in 1885. I would hope so. At this point, Clint Eastwood's like 103 years old approximately, so maybe they might have heard of him back then, who knows? But he just has so many funny gimmicks in this one, especially considering when people try to call him out by calling him names, which is something you do not do to Marty McFly. And he doesn't coward out of certain situations, like the showdown he has with Buford Tannen. He just chooses not to fight, and it perplexes everybody. And that whole scene in the saloon with Buford Tannen leads to this great meme.
He's an asshole.
I can't lie, I've quoted that line probably more than any other. Not just from this film, but from the entire trilogy. And like I said, the production team, Michael J. Fox, they got to have a lot of fun with the Western genre. There's a lot of really cool nods to the Man with No Name trilogy in here. And Alan Silvestri's score, I feel like a lot of this is more so an homage to what Ennio Morricone did so well. But again, it's still a Back to the Future movie. You can still tell that this is Alan Silvestri written all over it. And you can still tell it's Robert Zemeckis directing it and writing it with Bob Gale. These characters are just, they're all so well freaking realized, man. Now, as I said, Michael J. Fox was more so the heart of the duo between him and Doc Brown in the previous two movies, and Doc Brown was more so the comic relief. Here, the roles are flip-flopped. And Christopher Lloyd gets to be the emotional crutch of Part 3, and he does a really great job with it. Especially considering the fact that Emmett Brown now has some love in his life in the form of Clara, played by Mary Steenburgen, and she plays her masterfully. I kind of wish that there were a few more interesting little tidbits about this character that make her seem less plain or ordinary. But I've heard this from a fair amount of people regarding Part 3. Why does Doc Brown need to fall in love? Why does this story element need to be here? Doc Brown isn't the type of character that gets love. First of all, anybody can get love. Shame on you. And second of all, if Mary Steenburgen was not in this movie, Doc Brown would have no reason to stay behind. So that adds the extra layer of conflict that is necessary for part 3. Because let's face it, if Mary Steenburgen was not in this movie, it would be a very easy decision and it would feel very one-dimensional as a story. So I for one appreciate that the love element for Doc Brown exists. And I think over the course of 2 hours, this thing flies by. I do have a couple of glaring issues with this though. Is it just me, or does any time Marty go back or forward in the timeline, how come every single family lineage that he comes across, they just seem to have the same exact jobs? Like the principal in the first movie, 100 years before that, his ancestor was the mayor of Hill Valley. And how come in every timeline, Biff Tannen's relatives are assholes? And they all look like Thomas F. Wilson, who, by the way, I feel like was born to play a cowboy. Like, I'm not even kidding you. He was eating every single ounce of frame that he gets here. And once again, as a Tannen, he is a very strong villain. So there are some bright spots to seeing that. But I was like, if I'm being really pedantic about it, in real life, you don't come across nearly that many people who stick to the same jobs and the same personalities. Every human is different. Just because you share the same last name does not basically make you the exact same as your predecessors. And it seems like unless you were Marty or Doc, every single family ties were basically mirror images of each other. And I will also mention this about the ending and how this trilogy wraps up. I feel like there's a part of me that was sitting there, and before I recorded this video even, I was like, this ending is a very bittersweet choice and a bold choice for the series to make. There was a part of me that kind of wishes they stuck with that to leave a bit more finality to what was going on. And don't worry, if you've never seen Back to the Future Part 3 or this entire trilogy, which first of all, what's wrong with you? I'm not going to spoil anything, just in case. But that little part of me was just kind of eating at me before I started recording tonight. But then I get to thinking more and more about it. And it would be very uncharacteristic of Back to the Future to end on a bittersweet note. Because the resolution, what you get, there does feel to be some bittersweet tendencies here. But ultimately, it all boils down, and it's a very happy ending for both of our main characters. And these are endings that could only be written for these characters. I will mention one last thing about the ending. The message of this movie really hammers it in for you. Like, you can kind of sense what the message was by the end of the first movie, but by the end of the trilogy, once you get to the final 5 minutes or so, the screenwriters just kind of kept pushing it down your throat. It felt that to me, at least. And by that point, I'm like, I get it. You got to create your own destiny. I get it. But aside from that, this movie is still a hell of a lot of fun. And it concludes what I consider to be one of the most consistently fun trilogies in movie history. If you haven't seen Part 3 in a while, I highly encourage you to go and revisit this, especially to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the original. Just go back and watch all 3, because honestly, it's a trilogy, and it feels kind of incomplete if you only watch one. But I'm going to give Back to the Future Part 3 a B+. Definitely superior to Part 2. It's unrealistic to think that this can hold a candle to what the original Back to the Future did. But I don't know. I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that consider Part 3 their favorite. Let me know if that's you down in the comment section below. Again, it's not out of the question. I prefer Last Crusade over Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've said that in the past. But that's the magic of movies. We can all have our own opinions. We can all be respectful about it. We can all geek out together. And this channel is a great place to do it. So hit that subscribe button if you're new. Tap on that thumbs up as well if you enjoyed what you saw today. And stay tuned for more exciting videos hitting the channel very soon. Y'all are the best. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.